Hello everybody, how are you going and welcome to this video where today we're looking at more Historica Canada videos, the same people that make their famed heritage minutes, but this one being new and being the Vikings.
Many people think the story of Europeans coming to Canada began with the British and French, but that is a common myth.
Yeah, it makes sense.
The first Europeans to land in what is now Canada arrived about 500 years earlier, thousands of years after Indigenous peoples.
Even that's great.
These Norse explorers, often called Vikings, arrived around the year 1000 from what is now Scandinavia.
God, I mean, I know that it's a thing and the world's so hostile and has been so hostile and even more so hostile over all of history, but my goodness, the fact of the matter is I just never can really wrap my head around the fact that people were living up in those icy conditions for such a long time, even from Aboriginal people up in Canada, kind of traversing all of the area, not just like, oh, the 49th parallel right on the border of the USA where it starts to get a little bit warmer. No, people have been living in these just frozen wastelands for such a long time, and they, as much as they explored, they always kind of went back to home. They never really kind of were nomadic in terms of went, look at this place, I guess we're packing up the entire country and moving here. Yes, they colonized, but they always kind of held onto the homeland, which kind of surprised me. Like even the UK is pretty cold. In some regards, I wouldn't have been surprised if they just discovered India or anywhere around the world that they eventually colonized, but just went, stuff this, we're moving here. Like, it's going to be a lot of people, but this is going to be our main home base. Stuff the freezing place back home. I mean, of course, there are so many more dynamics that make that just technically impossible, but at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact that it always amazes me that people lived in these conditions and explored and thrived, properly thrived in these frigid conditions. Citizenship challenge.
When people think about Vikings, they often imagine warriors with horned helmets, roaming the seas on dragon-headed ships or charging into battle. The reality of the Vikings, a word often translated as raiders, is very different. They were Norse people who actually spent most of their time as farmers and traders.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I guess you got to be getting there in the first place somehow, and also not getting your butt kicked as soon as you step foot on land. So maybe the first explorers are going to be a little bit translated to pillagers and raiders. But then after that, as soon as you have just boats and boats and boats of people, it's definitely going to be looking more like just a generic village than just a chaotic, just war zone constantly. Like in some films, let's even take an animated film like How to Train Your Dragon, where yes, there's a lot of fighting and there's a lot of those kind of characters, but it's still a village with smiths and everyone else, farmers, horse people, like everyone is all in there at the same time. It's not just a full population, which I guess is often a common myth. Like people just think kind of the whole population was just hanging out on ships, and it's like, no, that's the people that were meeting everyone else around the world, but it's not the main population. It's like meeting the SAS or any kind of elite force. It's like, that's not the population.
They were Norse people who actually spent most of their time as farmers and traders.
God.
In the 10th century, Norse expansion west included settlements in Greenland.
Wow.
Around the year 985, Icelandic documents tell us that a storm blew a Norse trader named Bjarni Herjulfsson off course on his way to join the new Greenlanders.
Wow.
His bad luck would make him the first recorded European to see the east coast of North America.
Jeez, is that the true story? That's outrageous, man. I love this map as well, and being Historica Canada videos, we know that it is going to be referencing, or, I mean, it's clearly redrawn, but referencing the actual maps of the time, which is crazy with all of the names, and you can see Iceland and Greenland, and then what ended up being Canada, and everyone else in there as well. But just to be discovering arguably one of the largest continents, or the second largest now country in the world, just by a storm? Pfft, what kind of bad fate, good luck is that?
Some years later, the famous explorer Leif Erikson retraced Bjarni's voyage.
Nice.
He named the lands he encountered Helleland, land of stone slabs, Markland, land of forests, and Vinland, land of wine. These areas are now commonly thought to be Baffin Island, Labrador, and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, stretching up to Newfoundland.
Jeez, he didn't get that far.
Tales of these Norse journeys were passed along orally as sagas. Norse stories that record histories and legends of their lives and adventures.
Of course.
Named after the land that inspired them, the Vinland sagas were written down in the 13th century.
Wow.
They kept the tales of these journeys alive for hundreds of years.
Yeah, for sure.
Today, these sagas complement the archaeological findings. The Norse who came to North America were mostly interested in resources and exploration.
Yeah.
Their ships carried work crews, with some women for domestic labor. They built a base...
Sure, I mean, that's one way to put it, I guess. But at the same time, I can only imagine that, given everything I've already said, that there's going to be a massive fur trade. We know that became a thing, especially when the British and the French and everyone else came over. The fur trade just expanded west massively as they just went, look at how much land we've got. Look at how many animals we've got between everyone, all the moose and the beavers and every pelt under the sun. But of course, there are going to be other things that we're trading, and I wonder what kind of minerals they were after. I mean, considering he was talking about the cliff faces and all those kind of things, maybe they were hoping for iron of some sort. Obviously, they have their axes and all of those kind of smithing ability and quite high ability as well. And so I wonder what kind of materials exactly they were looking for, because, I mean, the ships are all timber at that point. It's not like you need massive amounts of iron and steel and all those kind of things. So it's certainly nowhere near the Industrial Revolution. But they had their own industrial revolution at the time, or at least they had been building that knowledge for so long. And if you suddenly discover an entire new continent after you being on the tip of the world, it's going to feel like a gold mine, no matter what kind of ore it is.
They built a base camp on Newfoundland's Great Northern Peninsula and named the settlement Stromfjord. It is believed to be the site known today as L'Anse aux Meadows. Stromfjord had room for about 100 people, and featured 3 large halls, a small house, a hut, and 3 pit buildings. The Norse worked at the base camp. They manufactured iron and traveled extensively by water.
There we go. There it is. Extensively, they manufactured. No, they didn't travel extensively via iron, but they traveled extensively and they made iron tools, which of course is going to be the main thing. But to only be having a settlement of 100 people, I mean, I guess it's not like you have these massive cities. I guess if you go back further, when is the Roman Empire? It's further than that. But at the same time, these kind of city scales, no matter when it is, don't really exist in these kind of village settings. That's for sure. And so to be shipping them across the world, there's no denying that at the time that is a massive journey across the Atlantic under wind power, and the navigational skills of these people are just off the charts for the time. It's so incredible, from their smithing to their navigation to everything else in between. But to only be settling 100 people and just to be able to survive easily, and then exploring on top of that, that's impressive again.
Archaeologists have found traces of butternuts, a type of walnut found in southeastern Canada.
What?
This indicates that the Norse went south to New Brunswick and the Gulf of St. Lawrence. It is likely that the Norse set up multiple camps. In the sagas, a camp called Hope was used in the summers. At Hope, the Norse came across resources like wild grapes, the source of their wine, and also the reason for the name Vinland. The area where the Norse landed had first been occupied about 6,000 years ago by several indigenous groups.
Just crazy.
These included the maritime archaic tradition, the Grosswater tradition, the Dorset, and the ancestral Beothuk.
I mean, again, all respect to the Vikings, the Norse, and everyone else, and the explorers, and the ability of these people, right or wrong. Their ability to just traverse these waters, these lands, is just so incredible. But then, like they said, to be having thousands of years of Aboriginal culture and knowledge and know-how and on-land exploration, just by literally just being nomadic to some degree as well, it's just incredible. I mean, yes, there's a long time period, but to be a culture that survives for that long, and like I said, just building and building and building and building, and know what berries, what animals, how to be in tune with nature, to be going, oh, well, if we stay down here, every single year it floods, so we're going to move up here. Like, there's all those kind of things that are just worldwide, whether it be in North America, whether it be in Australia or Africa or wherever else there might be Aboriginal people just living in their lands, either today or sadly no longer today. There were always remnants that just showed that they were so in tune with nature, and it's just nothing but incredible. Like, to be having no modern scientific kind of understanding, but still to be explaining everything through story and then passing that down. It's just a completely different mindset that works so well, clearly, because there's no other way that you can survive for 2,000 years, for 30,000 years, for 60,000 years, whatever it may be. It's nothing short of incredible. And everyone's always had their incredible moments, but everything requires respect in that regard.
When the Norse newcomers arrived at Meadows,
they found
hearths,
some.
artifacts, and tent
Wow.
rings revealed that the area had been previously occupied.
Of course.
The
you
ancestral
wonder.
Beothuk still lived in the vicinity,
Okay.
and Norse explorations of the Gulf of St. Lawrence led to encounters with the ancestors of the Micmac, the
Wow.
Beothuk, and the Innu. The
Yeah,
sagas
nice.
mention both peaceful and violent encounters with the local indigenous population,
It makes sense.
but they only tell a small piece of the complex relationships between these peoples.
I'm going to guess there is a degree of trading and a degree of fighting and a degree of trading and a degree of curiosity of these people. I mean, these kind of times, there is no way to elaborate on things besides just going out and facing it head on. There's no way to test things without just getting an arrow in your shield. And so as much as they are going to be showing that it's like, hey, we've got some things, you might like them, we've got some knowledge that you might have just because it's a completely different mindset from the other side of the Atlantic, maybe you want to give us some, maybe you have some. And there was mutual respect, but then of course there is going to be non-peaceful ones as well. Yeah,
But
it
they
makes
only
sense.
tell a small piece of the complex relationships between these peoples.
Yeah, for sure.
Conflicts with indigenous communities might have been one of the reasons why the Norse did not establish a permanent colony in Canada.
Fair enough.
But the
Which is-
Greenlanders also didn't have a large enough population to sustain travel to both Europe and Vinland.
Yeah, right.
So the Norse abandoned their base in Canada, only returning occasionally to Labrador for lumber.
For they went all the way there for lumber, for timber. What? I mean, I guess, wow. I mean, I guess you don't have mounds of timber if you're just chopping down trees to the extent that they are for housing, for boating, for everything, because that's your massive main resource. But still, to be traveling across the Atlantic, going, should we just go get some timber? I mean, I guess maybe it's just some good timber, and I'm sure it is, but that's crazy that they would bother after they kind of went, we really can't establish here, and we would really have to commit just to bring thousands and thousands to people to, one, establish a colony big enough to kind of defend ourselves and have a proper establishment, but then still to be like keeping in a memory going, you know what, we're not going to just stay here, but man, do I have my favorite spot, and I'm going to come back and just get it. That's just crazy. Like, it's not a short journey. I don't think they've mentioned, unless I'm crazy, I don't think they've mentioned how long it would take, and I would love to know how long would it have taken them on average, just to go from anywhere in Europe to these areas. Like, is it a 3-month journey? Is it I don't know, but that's a long time. You can basically chop the tree down and then air it out on the way back.
As the memory of these journeys faded, the Vinland sagas kept their legacy alive.
Fair enough.
But without physical evidence, the stories were often left out of mainstream history.
Yeah, right. Okay.
1,000 years after Bjarne's voyage, Norwegian archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad led the first excavations on Meadows. In 1978, this long-lost historical site was designated one of the first UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Hang on. Is that rebuilt to be reminiscent of what it would have been based on the sites? I mean, this is like 1,000 years ago. I can't imagine that after 1,000 years of any kind of stone structure that is sticking out from the ground next to the ocean still standing, especially after being frozen and snowed on and wind and rain and hail for 1,000 years. There's no way. That must be rebuilt, surely, unless that's just crazy. I mean, they were talking about, even in this kind of photo, you can see that they were leveled. And I've seen a photo of that cartoon illustration before, which makes sense, and that's why they're doing excavation. So I'd love to know, what is this historic site? It must be some kind of recreation based on all the evidence that they've collected. But still, you can see how for 100 people, it's not going to be comfy, but then nothing's comfy by modern standards at the time then. Everyone would have been comfy. That would have been normal. It would have been just what it was.
Was designated one of the first UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
That's pretty crazy as well.
Archaeology has expanded our understanding of how and which Europeans first came to Canada. These discoveries have debunked the common myth that it was the British and French.
Nope.
Today,
No way.
thousands of people go every year to Meadows to learn about Norse history in the Americas.
Nice. There we go. I mean, even the fact that they have made a heritage minute on this whole topic, I believe. I don't know why it suddenly came back to me, or I knew about it, but I was just seeing that with this kind of ghostly figure sort of walking through. That's the same kind of thing that they did in the heritage minute. And so it must be recreated. And clearly the timber work is going to be new and all of those kind of things, but it would have been amazing if you can have a 1,000-year time lapse, like some just time lapse that is showing the degradation and then all of a sudden just people coming, exploring, and then building it back. Like it would be frames, fractions of seconds that people have actually just designated the time. Like it was 1998 or whatever it was when they finally kind of recognized it after being 1,000 years ago. And so overall you can see how, like I said, it's an incredible thing for all of Europe to be making their way over from an archaeological point of view and from a traveling and exploration point of view. Obviously, history is history, and we know how everything turned out so far, and hopefully we can continue to expand our horizons through things like archaeology and records, just to really be able to respect the people that came before. Yes, there are plenty of ways that we can improve, but if we can even just look at the past and go, wow, these people existed for this amount of time, and then for whatever reason, maybe they're not around anymore, but it doesn't matter. Their remnants are still around. They are still present in a modern day society to some degree, and there's a level of respect that you have to have for that after sticking around for thousands of years in, like I said, just these Arctic conditions or extremely hot conditions. If it's at the other end of the spectrum or if it's tropical or whatever it is, like all over the world, there are just people that have been living in harmony with nature for so long, so impressively. And the Vikings and everyone else in between are just one small sliver.